you mentioned the Opportunity Scholarship Act, which you described correctly, and I wanted to pose to Brett. I first met him 20 years ago. He was on Christy Whitman's voucher task force. He was some mayor in Jersey City, and I said, I better get to know him. Little did I know. But speak to that bill, where we're headed. I mean, do you envision that after all these years that something like that may be in place in the next couple of years? Is vouchers coming to New Jersey, or is it going to be another 20 years?
In fact, I think that's an example of one of the areas where we could have passed legislation already with the Democratic leadership, where instead we didn't seize the opportunity as we might have. With that said, that we can go and spend a lot of time on, let's say, private school choice, and I'm sure that can fill up hours all by itself, or days, or weeks, or years. But and I think everyone here probably already knows I'm a pretty strong supporter of that. What I want to do is actually pick up on something that Bill said, and let's say an aspect of a Race to the Top application which didn't get a lot of attention, but was of very keen interest to the federal reviewers. I should say not only of interest, but they thought it was great, and they gave us points for it, even though normally they only give you points for stuff you actually have in place, not just ideas, was something we called Achievement Academies. And Achievement Academies were envisioned as wholly owned subsidiaries of school districts, which would be charter-like. They, in short, are not a separate corporation outside the district. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of the district, but like a charter school, that have pedagogical budget and personnel autonomy on the condition of achieving higher levels of performance as defined in Race to the Top, which is to say student learning. So you, in a short, and you may know that in Race to the Top, they tried to encourage not just merit pay, but other kinds of professional let's say, benefits for educational effectiveness. One of those benefits is the ability to, let's say, run a school without necessarily having gotten a master's in school leadership. Whereas an educator, by demonstrating that you're really great at teaching and then, let's say, mentoring other teachers how to teach effectively, you can become the head of school. And that becomes particularly easy if you move away from schools being buildings and you think of schools as communities of learning, and you think about your building being a facility that can be broken up into many schools, which also facilitates allowing different schools to be focused, if you will, on different pedagogical approaches which may work better with different children. So rather than a common school, one-size-fits-all approach, it says children are different. We're going to have a child customized learning, and we're going to allow there to be different schools in a single building. And I would add that if you actually then allow support services to be provided by not just the district potentially, but jointure commissions or the county or different enterprises which achieve economies of scale providing support services, which is not just things like special education services, but could be things like the accounting. And if you have, let's say the district or some other instrumentality run the facilities and you just give the schools money and they pay back a rent, which among other things makes them use space more cost efficiently because they could use money not spent on rent on educational operations. Then what you end up with is a situation where educators, the head of school, focuses on the educational plan, on the staff development, or to say the professional development of the educators, and they're not worried about running a building. They're not worried about a business enterprise, if you will. They're able to focus on what you'd really like them to focus on. And I would argue that that would help improve the quality of the teacher in the classroom if you had the head of school really focused on developing the educators as educators. And that, we know from research, is the number one thing that makes a difference in child learning. So that goal of moving towards lots of small, diverse schools where there's much more collegiality and they're run, if you will, by the educators and the head of school, as opposed to being politically run enterprises from top down, I think that is something where we could dramatically expand choice, but all sorts of other let's say, fundamental structures in public education that would be to the good.
Is that an opportunity lost in not getting the money? I mean,
no,
how much was that about money?
No, I think, in fact, I think we're going there in America. I think we'll get there. Now, mind you, I was pushing Race to the Top reforms in 1993 together with my charter school proposal for the state, which got adopted, and together with my voucher proposal for New Jersey City, which didn't get adopted. But that stuff was considered radical back then, and it is, the kinds of again, what I would call educational effectiveness or accountability reforms that are central to Race to the Top are not radical anymore. You know, they are.
And do they cost money? I mean, do we need $400 million from the feds to do those?
In fact, they save money. So again, and the best models we have in this state already are your county schools, you know, let's say vocational schools. Hudson County has 12 schools and 2 buildings. They've already moved towards this model.
Not cheap schools, though.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all. But the bottom line is, let's say the moving towards having small schools where you don't have to have let's say a principal certificate, you know, a master's to become the head of the school. That's the way many of these schools operate. That model is already moving forward. I think will continue to move forward. And if you actually went to the point where you gave schools budget autonomy and you gave them funding for facilities, but they rented back from the district. So the district would give them money on a per child basis. They'd rent space back on a per square foot basis, which creates then an economic incentive not to get wasteful space, either too much space or too gold-plated space. It makes you want cost-effective space so you can maximize the amount of money that's available for teaching the children.
Yeah, Bill, you wanted to add something?
Yes, and I'll try to be brief.
Yeah.
I think we do have some examples in this state where we have had successful smaller schools that have been launched. And I don't think that money is automatically necessary to do that. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I think any place where you have a real well-functioning magnet school system, I think Montclair is one of the best in the country, warts and all. I think what you see is people getting together and saying, here's who we are. Here's how we want to do this. And there is a lot of growth that occurred as a result of that. Those places worked hard to be attractive enough to have teachers come where they wanted to work and parents who wanted to come there. I think we have a public school system strong enough to tolerate more options inside that. I'd also say there's not very much attention's ever been paid to the history of alternate schools in this state. I have some experience with that where people, and I was involved first as a teacher in it and later created that as an option in high school for kids not well served. And that had the elements of putting people together, having them think together and say, we'd like to try this. I think that all of what's been said about the limits of charters in terms of achievement data is certainly true. I would argue that we haven't given a constellation of smaller entities much of a chance to really succeed in order to conclude that that wouldn't work. And that's where I think this whole idea gets derailed by charters versus public, public versus charters. We should expand this discussion, and I think we're just examples of that. We have different views as to how that would happen, but if you put people together and had them do that, I think there would be real good leadership that would emerge and real good outcomes for teachers, parents, and kids.
I mean, these are topics. I live in Montclair, and something that, you know, we've sort of recognize the warts and all, but the merits of the idea, and a lot of these ideas we're talking about, small schools, have been around for 20 years, and if not much longer. Why are we moving slowly in adopting these models? You all have overseen school systems that glacial isn't quite the term for it, but I mean, you know, well, David, you're running a school system now. What is getting in the way of seizing some of these things in a school? Maybe it comes back to the politics that were talked about, but.
Well, I think exactly, it does come back to that. If you look at how many charter schools have we had since, what, 1998, I guess, is when this went into effect. How many charters have we had? 100, maybe? How many charters have we revoked? 75? Yeah. How many charters have we revoked? Probably 10, maybe?
About right.
And I think when you start looking at that dynamic, you're saying, well, what's the issue here? Because we've all 5 of us have reviewed charter school applications. What stops us from saying this is going to be a quality educational opportunity and this is not? And there's your answer right there. Charter schools are only good if they provide a quality educational opportunity for children where they don't necessarily now have one. That's the home run for charters. How do we make sure that that's going to be a positive quality educational opportunity? Well, we're looking at an application. That's what we're looking at, an application, and it's very difficult sometimes to look at that application, and there's a lot of gaps always because there's normally a planning year, and it's a very difficult thing to do, and you're the only authorizer. The only person who can authorize them in this state is the commissioner, and I think that creates the problem.
And there is a bill now that would expand that as well.
And that would be a wonderful thing.
John, in many of the cases where the charter schools are functioning in high areas of poverty, education is not a standalone. In order to be successful, they have to bring in, if we're talking on a state level now, and the commissioner's in charge, the Department of Health, Department of Human Services at the very least. In many cases, Department of Transportation because there are no school buses. Family Services, the juvenile justice system, and in terms of parental involvement or with guardians, you're talking about the Department of Corrections. So education is really what the business is, but they can't do it by themselves. I remember visiting the Lee Charter School in Camden, and because of the relationship with the law school, they had pro bono services for the parents or guardians of the students at evening hours. They also had physician's assistants running clinics from the nearby Cooper Hospital. And that, I believe, documents what I believe to be the important issue here. So it's not just the education aspect, it's the cooperation of the entire community if you're going to be successful, and I think they are. So I think we have to keep that in mind.